Hi, everybody, and welcome. It's Martha. We will start in about 5 minutes. So everybody, please hang tight. Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. This is your 2-minute warning. We will begin in 2 minutes. So hold tight. Thanks.
If I use that number. Yeah. Oh, those, yeah. It says that I'm here. It says 22 attendees. It might be right at 2 o'clock.
What's the thing that makes it so I can hear everybody?
Hello?
Hello?
Hi there, it's Martha. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Good, good, good. Well, we're going to go ahead and begin. And before we begin, just a few little housekeeping rules. Please don't put this call on hold. If you do, we hear your hold music. So if you do need to take another call or whatever, just hang up and then come back in and dial in and come back into the session that way.
Linda Lightfoot, Angela is on line 68111. Linda 68111.
Hey, Linda, can you please close your door? We can hear your overhead, Linda Lightfoot. That would be appreciated. If you have any
How
questions,
do we mute the phone? I've got several people here with me, Martha.
John, you can either just mute. We're gonna mute all of you in a few seconds.
Okay.
But if you want to mute yourself right now, all you have to do is do *6.
Thank you.
And that will mute yourself. But like I said, we are going to mute. John, I guess that was probably coming from your area. If you want to ask a question, you can unmute yourself at any time. Again, #6 is unmute, *6 is mute. But we will, like I said, we will be muting all of you here in a couple of seconds. If you want to share this audio with anybody, any of you managers, it will be online at Inside Easy Moves probably in a few days. And before I forget, the next Ask the Broker webinar will be for Thursday, September 19th. So again, Thursday, September 19th at 2 o'clock. So you may want to mark your calendars. I want to also thank everyone for attending. It looks like we've got at least 37 attendees, and I do know we've got some managers or sales managers that might have a group in a conference room, but I do want to thank the managers, sales managers that I know that are online. We've got Connie Manzano from Scottsdale 101. We've got Dawn Ryda, Phoenix Metro. We've got Dolores Petal, who's the receptionist at Sun City. Hi, Dolores. We've got Donna Gallagher, who's the office manager for Green Valley. We've got Jim Durham, the office manager for Lake Havasu. And we've got Paul Newland, branch manager of Williams Center in Tucson, and Paige Heavey, branch manager of both Pinnacle Peak and Carefree, and Pat Burden of Sun City. So I thank you all for being on the call today. For those of you that show up as just a call-in user number instead of an actual name, which you might want to do for future reference, when you log in and you dial in and then it asks you for a session number, and then below that there's another number. If you put in that number at the very bottom, that's how your actual name shows up. So you may want to purposely stay anonymous. That's fine. But if not, just for next time, if you go ahead and put in your name, then I will know who's all on the call. Did I miss any managers that I didn't call out? No? So I called out everybody that all the managers that are currently on the call. Okay, we're going to go ahead and unmute you all. Mute you all right now so we don't hear your background noise and et cetera. Towards the end, we will unmute you all, and if you have any questions, you can certainly go ahead and do that. So we're gonna mute you all right now.
The leader has muted your line. To unmute your line, press *6 or #6.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and begin. We are going to talk about the Buyer Contingency Addendum form today. And the reason why we are doing this is because we're starting to see more and more contracts, and I'm sure it's because of the market, where the buyer writes an offer that's contingent upon the buyer's current house selling. And although maybe many of these offers may not be accepted under the circumstances because of our listing inventory being so low currently, and the seller's ability to accept other offers, they may not want to accept a offer that is contingent upon the buyer's house. But we do have the form, and like I said, we are starting to see this a little bit more, so I do want to go over this. And for any of you that saw my email previously, about 1 o'clock that I sent out, there is a major flaw in this form. And so we're actually going to go through the form, then we'll talk about the flaw, and then how to fix the flaw if you're on the seller's end, if you're the listing agent, and then I will briefly describe the revised form that's going to be coming out in February. It's essentially done, the revised form, but it has to go through some committee approval through AAR. So we're going to start out with the form. Obviously, we have seller's name, buyer's name, premises address, date, lines 1 through 4. And it says the following additional terms and conditions are hereby included as part of the contract between seller and buyer for the above referenced premises. If marked by X and initial by buyer and seller, all terms and conditions in the contract are hereby included herein, and delivery of all notices and documentation shall be deemed delivered and received when sent as required by Section 8M of the purchase contract. And essentially, 8M of the purchase contract describes what the definition of notices and the definition of essentially what it says is, unless otherwise provided, this is from the purchase contract 8M, delivery of all notices and documentation required or permitted hereunder shall be in writing and deemed delivered and received when, number 1, hand delivered, number 2, sent via facsimile transmission, sent via electronic mail if email addresses are provided herein, we'll talk about that in a minute, or number 4, sent by recognized overnight courier service and addressed to buyer as indicated in Section 8R, which is the last page of the purchase contract, to seller, who's indicated in Section 9A of the purchase contract, and to the escrow company indicated in Section 3A. As you hopefully know, company policy has been not to put your email addresses in the purchase contract, and the reason for that is, again, because of that Section 8M, as soon as an agent sends something to your email, whether it's a SPUDS, a BINSR, et cetera, then it is deemed delivered if you've got your email address in the purchase contract. My concern is if an agent is not very, very proactive in checking their email multiple times per day, or goes out of town, or for whatever reason is not checking their email frequently, if a form that comes in that has some time period, time expiration, like the BINSR, or anything else where the client has to respond to that document within a certain amount of time, and if it sits in an agent's email box without being checked or noticed, then they are losing precious days that their client could use to respond to the other side. You can certainly, even though your email address isn't in the purchase contract, you can certainly email back and forth between you and the other agent. You can certainly send forms back and forth, but the delivery time frames don't necessarily start by delivery into an email box if you do not have your email address in the purchase contract. So I just wanted to kind of remind everybody that one glitch that could cause problems in the purchase contract. So again, now we have 2 boxes. The first box, which is on this page, Not on line 9, contingent on the sale and closing of a buyer's property. This contract is contingent on an accepted offer to purchase or sell a buyer's real property located at blah, 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 blah. This would be used if the buyer's property is currently not in escrow, okay? There is no contract on the buyer's current property, right? So contingent on the sale and closing of the buyer's property. But again, it is not currently under contract. Then you have the buyer's address, and then the buy. The buy is when the buyer is required to go under contract. So that is a date, okay? So that is the date that is required that the buyer must be under contract on their property by. So for instance, today is August 15th. A listing agent or seller's agent may want to say that the buyer's property must be under contract no later than September 1st, for instance, okay? Lines 12, 12, et cetera, goes on to say if buyer accepts an offer to purchase buyer's property, buyer shall deliver the sale documents to seller for review as described below within 5 days after acceptance of the offer. So if a buyer does receive a contract on the buyer's property, then per this language, they must send those sale documents, transaction documents, to the seller for review, okay, within 5 days after the acceptance of that offer. Unless seller cancels this contract within the time specified, this contract shall become contingent upon the closing of the pending sale of the buyer's property by blank. Pardon me. That's another date, line 15. That'd be another date that would go in there, and essentially that is either going to be the close of escrow of this contract between this seller and this buyer, or maybe a couple of days prior to that, which may be beneficial to the buyer. Instead of having concurrent closings, your seller may want to make sure that the closing of the buyer's property does happen a day or two prior to the closing of this one. So unless for whatever reason the seller cancels because maybe they didn't like the terms of the buyer's contract on their house, then this is line 15 is going to be when they must close on their property. So again, just a little bit of review because it's a little confusing. Line 11, the buy would be when the buyer's property must be under contract. Line 15, the date must be when that closes. Okay, two different dates, two different places. Line 16, if seller accepts the subsequent offer to purchase the premises before the sale of the buyer's property, so again, this would go back to line 11, seller shall deliver written notice to the buyer. Okay, upon receipt of seller's notice, buyer shall have 5 days or blank days to deliver to seller a written agreement to remove the contingency, remove this contingency, essentially, and written documentation from buyer's lender that buyer can close escrow by the close of escrow date, which again would be on line 15, without the sale and closing of the buyer's property, or this contract shall be deemed canceled due to an unfulfilled contingency. So essentially, if the seller accepts, this is kind of like a first right of refusal. If the seller accepts a subsequent offer, which must be in backup position, okay, back to line 16, the seller accepts the subsequent offer, which is a backup offer, then the seller shall deliver written notice to the buyer. And then upon that notice, buyer shall give the seller 5 days or blank days to deliver to the seller their ability to cancel this contingency, but that they can still prove that they can close, so they don't need the funds from the sale of their house to buy this house, or they cancel the deal. And the buyer's and seller's initials are required. So again, that whole section is for when the buyer's property has still not gone under contract at the time that this offer is written. So now you've got the second box in line 23. Now, this would be the situation where the buyer writes the offer on this property and their property or their home is already under contract in escrow. All right, first one hasn't gone in, second box is that's already in escrow. So this would be the box contingent on the closing of the pending sale of buyer's property. This contract is contingent upon close of escrow or the closing on buyer's real property located, there's the address, by blank. So that on line 25, that date blank by would be when this one is going to close, when the buyer's current property's contract is supposed to close, which again would be either concurrent or a few days prior to the closing of this transaction. I know it's a little confusing, but hopefully everybody's with me. Then number 26, buyer shall deliver the sale documents as described below to seller within 5 days after acceptance of this contract. And you would list there on 27, 28 what exactly those sale documents are. So now you drop down to line 30, the following terms apply to either contingency agreed to above. So no matter if the contract on the buyer's property is in escrow or there is no contract on the buyer's property currently, everything on 30 and below does apply. So 31, seller review of sale documents. Within the time specified in the applicable section above, which is essentially 5 days, buyer shall deliver the following sale documents to seller. Copy of the purchase contract evidencing the sale and whatever else might be along with that. It could be a preliminary HUD-1. It could be whatever all addenda, et cetera, any counteroffers, et cetera, would be included in lines 34, 35. Any other transactional documents the seller would like to see in order for the seller to make an educated decision on whether or not they feel strongly that the buyer's contract on the buyer's house looks like it's going to close. And obviously some of those and this is where you as an agent would obviously have to assist the seller. If that buyer's contract, for instance, is contingent upon that buyer's house selling, okay, so now you've got a domino effect. Or if there's, depending on where they are in that, let's say it's already under escrow or already in escrow, depending on where they are, if they're not through the inspection period yet, the seller then, there's they have to weigh whether or not they think that deal is going to go through. If they're past the inspection, obviously the odds are increased a little bit that the buyer is going to go forward with that deal. If there's non-refundable earnest money, odds are a little bit greater that that deal might go through. So it's up to you to counsel your seller if they're looking at the buyer's contract and all the ancillary documents that go along with that. Does this look like a strong contract or does it not? Because if it doesn't, then the seller can say, I don't accept it. So we go on to say, 36, line 36, seller may within 5 days of receipt of the sale documents cancel this contract and all earnest money shall be returned to buyer if seller reasonably believes that the closing of buyer's property will not occur by the specified date. So if the seller is looking at the buyer's contract and it looks like a lousy contract and they say this isn't acceptable, and they probably are going to need your counsel on this, then they can cancel this contract immediately. Okay? If it does look like it's a good deal, then we're good to go. So line 38, seller acceptance of subsequent offer prior to closing of a pending sale of buyer's property, unless the closing of the pending sale of the buyer's property or cancellation of this contract, until the closing of the pending sale of the buyer's property or cancellation of this contract, any subsequent offer accepted by seller shall be a backup offer contingent upon the cancellation of this contract. So as mentioned before, if the seller decides to accept any other contract on the seller's property, then they would be in backup position in an until or unless the buyer cancels this one, which is in primary position currently. This is where it gets a little bit hairy. Line 41, unfulfilled contingency. If the sale and closing of buyer's property is not completed by the date specified above, remember we've got those two places where it's supposed to close by, this contract shall be deemed canceled due to an unfulfilled contingency I just was handed a question, so I'll get to that in a minute. Again, if the sale and closing of buyer's property is not completed by date specified, this contract shall be deemed canceled due to an unfulfilled contingency. So if we're a go, seller accepts the buyer's contract on the buyer's house, and if it doesn't close, if it cancels, or for whatever reason the close of escrow of the buyer's property comes and goes, this contract shall be deemed canceled due to an unfulfilled contingency. In such event, buyer shall deliver a notice that the sale and closing of buyer's property is not completed no later than the date specified, which is above. In the event of buyer's breach arising from the buyer's failure to deliver that required notice, the buyer doesn't let us know that their deal fell through and doesn't give us the written notice, seller shall exercise the option of Section 7B on the purchase contract, which is the breach, and that's when we talk about the seller's options at that point, you know, possibly taking the earnest money, et cetera. To accept the earnest money as seller's sole right to damages. Now, this one specifically says accept the earnest money as seller's sole right to damages. So the question that was just handed to me from Jim Durham, if the buyer removes the contingency, when does the inspection period begin? Some buyers may look at this as a chance to buy more time on the contract. Good question, Jim. Thank you. Essentially, all time periods in the contract do begin immediately. There's nothing in this addendum that pushes back the time periods. It's not like the short sale addendum to the purchase contract where none of the time periods in the contract begin until there is seller's lender approval. This is not the case here. Everything, all the time periods, all the inspection periods, the SPUDs, the insurance claims history, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the BINSR start per the time periods in the purchase contract. Nothing is delayed unless for some reason there's anything written into the contract to the contrary. So then you just have essentially the undersigned agrees to the modified or additional terms and conditions contained herein and acknowledges a copy hereof, and you have the signatures. So it's essentially what appears to be a short and sweet buyer contingency addendum. Now here's the problem, and Jim, thank you again for your question. Here's the problem with this form. And this is what actually happened to us. We represented the seller. This was last December, you know, sometimes the wheels at AAR take a little bit of greasing to get a form revised. Actually, what I've done, because I brought it to the attention of AAR, I actually chaired this work group to come up with the revised buyer contingency addendum. So here's the situation. Buyer's offer comes into our seller, and it's contingent upon the buyer's current home selling. The buyer's current home is in escrow. Everything's looking good. Seller receives copies of the buyer's contract on their house. Everything is proceeding nicely. About 3 weeks prior to the close of escrow on our contract, the buyer's agent contacts our listing agent to notify them that the buyer's contract on their house canceled for whatever reason. And we're already out of the inspection period on our contract, and you know everything looks good, et cetera, et cetera. And here comes the bombshell that the buyer's contract, maybe it was even 2 weeks before our close of escrow, cancels. So now what do? The buyer essentially has 2 weeks to find another buyer and be able to close by the closing date specified in the addendum. So I'm going to go back to lines 41 to 45. If the sale and closing of buyer's property is not completed by date specified, this contract shall be canceled due to an unfulfilled contingency. Sorry, I keep wanting to say loan contingency. That's what I've been working on all morning. In such event, buyer shall deliver notice that the sale and close of the buyer's property is not completed, et cetera, et cetera. So the buyer does everything per that unfulfilled contingency, but the seller is stuck and can't do anything else with this contract until the close of escrow on this contract comes and goes, and the buyer hasn't found another buyer and hasn't been able to close prior to or concurrent with the close of escrow of this deal, all the seller can do is twiddle their thumbs until that point, and due to the unfulfilled contingency language, after the close of escrow and the buyer has delivered notice, this deal is canceled and the buyer receives their earnest money back because it's an unfulfilled contingency. So obviously that's the flaw. That's the flaw, that their seller has no recourse in that particular situation. So this was actually brought to my attention by one of my managers, and we went over the form over and over again, and I said, you're right. I went to AAR, and I'm also a member of the AAR's Risk Management Committee, and all new or revised forms must go through the AAR's Risk Management Committee. So I brought this to the attention of the committee, and then there's always a vote. Okay, is it something that we need to set up a work group for? The answer was yes in this case, and then for obvious reasons, I volunteered to chair the revision of this buyer contingency addendum. We have had probably 4 or 5 meetings, and of all the work groups that I've been on and all the AAR forms that I've worked on, I have to tell you this was the toughest and the most painful form to revise because it's such a technical form. And, you know, with the contingencies and all this kind of stuff, we had to think, we had a small work group of about 5 or 6 of us. We had to think of all possible scenarios. Word for word was very important. We had to, you know, do we use the word cancel versus failed? I mean, that's how intricate we get on these committees. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what the new form is going to entail. Unfortunately, we missed the August 1st deadline to get this accepted through the AAR different committees because it has to go back to the Risk Management Committee, be approved by that committee, and then also approved by AAR's Executive Committee. So unfortunately, it's going to be February before this form comes out. So essentially, all right, so you know what the problem is. The problem is what the unfulfilled contingency. So what we've done is made it that if the buyer cancels, or if you remember on the on line 11, that the buyer has to have their property in escrow by such and such date, or if their buyer cancels, then the buyer has 2 choices. They can either cancel this deal or remove this contingency. Okay, at that point, they don't have to. They're not going to wait until close of escrow on this deal. So they either cancel it, or essentially they say that I'm going to remove this contingency that I have to sell my house. But along with that, again, and this is essentially similar language, that they have to give us proof from their lender that they can qualify for the loan on this house without having to sell their other house. And if it's a cash deal, which this one doesn't even, this particular form currently does not even reference, if it's a cash deal, then they must show that they have proof of funds without having to use those funds from the sale of their other home. So that's essentially, and it sounds really simple, but that is essentially the fix. That, again, if the buyer's other house can't get under escrow by a certain date specified, or if they are in escrow and that cancels, then they have their option to either cancel this deal or prove that they can close. So, and that's the fix, because in this one, there's nothing that says that they can that they have to do one or the other. Okay, and the new revised one will say they do have to do one or the other. And the new form will also have language in there that this does not waive the other contingencies in the contract. So you still have the appraisal contingency and you still have the financing contingency. But if you take this contingency out, and then again, the verbiage says that they can't use the fact that they didn't sell their other house to qualify for this one. They can't use that as the excuse. and then getting out on the unfulfilled loan contingency, because this has been removed. So hopefully that makes sense. I got another question here. What if the buyer removes the contingency but has not sold the subject property? The original contract did not require the buyers to show proof of funds. So now what? So hopefully I just got another little note. Stephanie's keeping me busy that you just got your answer, Jim. So I'm glad you were able to that I answered that for you. So hopefully everybody kind of understands. I know it's kind of a complex, convoluted, confusing form, but I hope everybody understands the flaw with the revised form, how it will fix that. So then the question is, what do we do about the current form? How do we fix it? If we represent the sellers, and this is only if we represent the sellers, because as a buyer's agent, we want the out wherever we possibly can. If we represent the sellers, then what I would advise is that lines 41 to 45 are X'd out and initialed, so it doesn't fall down into an unfulfilled contingency if something happens and the buyer's other home does not close. So essentially, you take that out of the picture, and they are removing the fact that this would be considered an unfulfilled contingency. So hopefully that makes sense. I'm not sure if a buyer's agent would agree to do that or a buyer would agree to do that, but obviously our job as a listing agent or as a selling agent is to protect our sellers the best way we can. So if you take that out, and then the buyer, it's not a 100% perfect fix. The new form will be, but in the meantime, if you take that unfulfilled contingency paragraph out and something happens and the buyer's contract on their property cancels, then it's not an unfulfilled contingency and they don't get their earnest money back, and at least the seller has some type of recourse, if you will. So I hope that helps. We're going to unmute you, and go ahead and unmute us. Stephanie keeps running in with more little notes. Please speak to MLS status. That always comes up when this addendum is used. Paige, good question. This
the leader has unmuted your line. To unmute your line, press *6 or #6.
Please, when we do open it up for questions, that you do one at a time. Paige asked a question again. Please speak of MLS status that always comes up when this addendum is used. This addendum, just like any other addendum, all it is a contingency. It's no different than the loan contingency. It's no different than the appraisal contingency. You have a fully executed, fully signed contract. And therefore, the status in MLS would be, depending on your association, pending, UCB, et cetera. I know it differs from MLS to MLS. Havasus might be different than Green Valley, might be different than Phoenix, might be different than Prescott. So, but it cannot stay active. It cannot stay active because you have a fully executed contract on the property. No different than any other contract that has, like I said, the appraisal contingency or the loan contingency. This is just another contingency. So, Paige, does that answer your question?
It does. So often they say, well, what if buyer and seller agree that the seller can keep their home active? And what I've told people is they can't agree on that because that's in violation of the MLS rules.
You are 100% right. Seller and buyer can never agree to circumvent the rules, whether it's the law, whether it's the MLS rules, whatever the case is, they can't agree to circumvent the rules of the law. Now, another one, just kind of as a digress here for a minute, many times what happens in a lease situation that, because we know that the Landlord-Tenant Act says that for any showings, essentially, the listing agent must give the tenant 2 days notice to show that property. That many times what we see in lease agreements is that landlord and tenant agree that they only have to give 5 hours notice or 2 hours notice or whatever the case is to show. That's circumventing the Landlord-Tenant Act, and you can't do that. Okay, any other questions? I hear some talking, so I don't know if you realize you're unmuted. And you can mute your own, if you don't have a mute button on your phone, again, you can mute your own phone by just pushing *6.
I never did it.
So,
Hi, Martha.
any other questions?
Yes, Martha, this is Marty at the Scottsdale and 101 office.
Hi, Marty. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
My question is, with respect to lines 41 through 45, if we do have that crossed off and if we can get the buyer's agent and buyer to agree to initial that is removed from the buyer contingency addendum, would it make sense, in addition to doing that, to create another addendum that will make reference to how the new one coming up in February will be worded as a supplement to this to kind of hedge our bet with respect to that, or what are your thoughts there?
Oh, that's a good point, Marty. So what you're saying is that we could take some of the language in the new revised form and use that on an addendum in advance of the new revised form coming out, right?
Yes.
Interesting. I could certainly do that. Yeah, in fact, I will make a note and I'll get that out to everybody. My concern is right now we've got about 45 attendees, maybe with some conference room attendees we might be at 60. That leaves about almost 1,100 agents that aren't listening to this webinar
right.
that may be a little confused on that. So what I would suggest that anybody that's on this call, if they run into that situation, send me an email and I will give you the language that you can use. Because again, my concern is if I put it out to agents that have no idea what the subject of this webinar was or what the flaw is in the form that caused problems.
Okay, good.
So
unless there's something too that the manager. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I was thinking maybe that's something that the managers can bring up in their weekly meeting as well, you know, in addition to. But yeah, but that answers my question. Thank you.
I could do that as well. In fact, managers that are on this call, what do you think?
Good idea.
That's one.
I agree, Paul.
Okay, it's unanimous. Okay. Okay, thank you, Martha.
All right, thanks, Marty. Thanks, managers. Okay, are there any other questions? Nothing? Clear as mud?
No, we got a question here with Monica Branch.
Hi there, Martha. It's Monica from the Havasu office. I have a question. I had an incident where I had a situation with a contingency where we actually put on addendum that the seller may not accept any subsequent offers on the property during this contingency. How do you incorporate that into this form?
Well, any offers, any subsequent offer accepted is going to be a backup position. The seller can't automatically accept another offer that goes into primary position without this contract being canceled. So
we're basically talking that the seller allows undisturbed marketing time and not accept any other subsequent offers. That's what I'm saying.
I don't understand what difference it would make to the buyer. I'm a little confused.
Sounds like the buyer wants to make sure that...
The buyer wants to be in control for a while.
Buyer doesn't want the seller to try to sell to somebody else is what I'm hearing. Is that...
That's correct. He wants to buy more time. By saying he cannot accept anything for a certain period of time, like 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
Why would the seller agree to that?
Well, you know, here's the difference.
He wanted the deal that bad.
Oh.
Here, I think the difference is we see that language a lot. The seller won't accept any other offers, but usually that's in short sales. And the reason for that is contrary to the short sale addendum to the purchase contract. There's the language, the boilerplate language in that form says that seller can accept backup offers, and those backup offers can be submitted to the lender, and the lender can, you know, essentially have 5 different contracts. Now we know in reality that doesn't happen because lenders normally just only want to see one, but they could, and then the primary contract could be blown out of the water by a better backup offer. So you know, that language I can understand, but in this particular situation, again, reference back to lines 38 to 40, until the closing of the pending sale of buyer's property or cancellation of this contract, any subsequent offer accepted by seller shall be a backup offer contingent on the cancellation of this contract. So that other offer literally just sits there, and the seller can't do anything about that backup offer until this contract is canceled. And now possibly where I might see, Monica, is if the buyer doesn't have another offer yet on their property, but the seller's sitting there with a backup contract, and so here comes a contract on the buyer's property. It is submitted to the seller, and the seller rejects it, which cancels this in order for them to go forward with their backup offer. So is that kind of what you're saying?
Yes, I am.
Because that's the only way that they'd be able to do that. So possibly as a buyer's agent, you might want to, again, take out that language depending on where the buyer's property, if it's in escrow or if it's not in escrow. Because if it's not in escrow, it really doesn't make a difference. I mean, if it is in escrow, it doesn't really make a difference because most likely within 5 days, the buyer gives the seller their contract documents. Seller goes ahead and says yes, okay, then it doesn't make a difference if another offer comes in. But they buy time. The only place where they buy time would be if they're not already under contract.
Correct.
And then I can possibly see it. Yeah, that's a good point, Monica. Any other questions?
Yeah, I just had a quick question, follow-up on landlord-tenant, which is not the topic today, but you mentioned 2-day notice for appointments for showing.
Right.
Would that be consistent for like any inspections or re-inspections or anything else as well?
Yes. It's how the Landlord-Tenant Act actually reads for any access to the property, unless it's an emergency. You know, like an emergency repair. You know, there's water running everywhere. But yeah, any type of access. In fact, the Landlord-Tenant Act specifically talks about showings, that type of thing. But yeah, Jim, it would be anything.
Okay, great. Thanks.
So does anybody have any other questions about anything while we're talking? Nothing, huh? Well, good. Well, before we let you all go, Stephanie Heinrichs, who's my assistant, I'm sure most of you know her, she's going to talk just a few minutes about changes that are going to be coming soon regarding credit reports. Steph, you want to take it away?
I'm here. Hey, everyone. This is Stephanie. Some of you may have already known I have been trying to get the word out to some of our agents that do a lot of rentals, but some of the new policy changes for credit reports are going into effect September 3rd. The first change is the credit report fees. For the first time in 9 years, the fees are going to go up. They are going from $20 per applicant or married couple with the same last name up to $40 per applicant or married couple with the same last name. The good news, we are not raising the fee for the background check, so that will still just be $10 per person per state. Then our next change is you may no longer accept cash or send cash. Your clients must pay by a cashier's check, a money order, or a personal check. If they come in with cash, you need to send them down to Quick Trip or Circle K or the post office or someplace, and they can get a money order or cashier's check. And then the third change is in order to get the credit report processed, you must send proof of payment. So along with your request form, you must send us a copy of the check, cashier's check, or money order. That's it for the changes that are going to be rolling out September 3rd. There are going to be a lot more changes coming in the next few weeks. We will be moving to a new standardized form that will be required. Some other things coming, but this is set, and we will be getting information out regarding these changes to the branch managers and office staff.
Thanks, Steph. I appreciate it. And just as a footnote on that, regarding just a reminder that the payment for those credit reports is always payable to Coldwell Banker and not to the landlord, whereas, you know, our policy has changed other than property management, Jim Durham, up in Havasu, is that any security deposits or earnest money on leases is now payable to the landlord. not to Coldwell Banker, but other than the credit report fees. So, and also, you know, Stephanie says 9 years, and the reason she's used 9 is because that's how long, as of tomorrow, by the way, she's been with the company. Tomorrow's Stephanie's anniversary, so everybody say happy anniversary to Stephanie.
Happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you, everyone.
She's both my right and left hand, left arms and left hands and everything. But in any case, the $20 has actually been way even before that. I've been with the company 17 years, and it's always been $20 from, in fact, when I was a Prudential acquisition, and at the time Coldwell Banker didn't do credit reports, but Prudential did, and I was able to convince our Coldwell Banker franchise at the time, Coldwell Banker Success, to allow us to do credit reports because it was really a service to our landlords. And, you know, in cases where there's a seller carryback, where the seller, there is no first lien, the seller owns the property free and clear, but instead of getting a check from the buyer or the buyer's lender for the purchase price, they say, well, I'll be the lender, okay? So in those cases, it's perfectly legal, but we certainly want to run a credit report on that buyer to make sure that they do qualify. And so in any case, it's been $20 for 17 years and with this company. And I believe that $20 makes us pretty much the lowest in the industry for credit reports. And we just can't continue to run it at $20 because of all the time it takes. It does take time. Back in the pre-foreclosure short sale days, and you all know Stephanie does run our credit reports. She's the one that's all heads that everything regarding credit reports. Steph would run about 30 credit reports a month. And due to all the foreclosures and short sales, we have a lot more leases. And now she's running over 100 credit reports per month. So it's time. It's you know, it takes some time to run the credit reports. Sometimes she's got to go back and forth with the agents because our request for credit report information is incomplete or we can't read it. So it takes time. So and there are costs. We're probably going to another administrator of the credit report, administrating credit report system, which is going to cost more than our current one. So a lot of changes coming on that, but they're overdue. So like Steph said, more information coming on that. So again, does anybody have any questions, comments, anything? Okay, well, great. Well, I appreciate everybody attending, and please, again, put on your calendars. Thursday, September 19th at 2 o'clock will be our next webinar. If anybody has any suggestions for the next forms, we can certainly do more than one form per webinar. Please send me an email. If anybody has comments, questions, anything, please don't hesitate to either give me a call at 480-481-8404 is my direct line, or send me an email. So thanks again for joining us, and we'll talk to you or see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.